Hello, my friends. Hello, and welcome once again to Stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned to talk about the future. The future, well, it's the near future now. We're talking about 2024. And my plans for 2024, I've got plans. You know, before I got on BookTube, I never had plans for reading for the next year. I just kind of read whatever, whenever, but since I've been on BookTube, you know, with all these BookTube events and all this other stuff going on, you know, I find myself having to plan ahead. So that's what I did. I've done some planning ahead. And Roger and I have both decided that next year is going to be a hell of a lot better than this year. At least we did decide that. And then in some comments in my last video, I was reminded that this is an election year and I hate politics. I hate politics. I hate politics. I should do a video on just how much I hate politics. I won't do that. Because politically, I'm not far in the right or far in the left. I'm kind of in the middle somewhere, which is the worst place to be in today's political environment. So I would just offend everybody. So I won't do that. I'm just going to talk about books, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. My future plans here at this channel. So a lot of stuff going on in 2024. And I should talk about, before I get to all the events and things like that, let's just talk about some of the things I have a few must-reads. I have a few books that I'm absolutely planning for sure to read this year. So let's talk about those first. So no matter what else is going on this year, and a lot seems to be going on, I am going to read these books some way, somehow. The first one is a book I've been planning on reading for years. This is Tim Powers' The Anubis Gates. I for sure am going to be reading this year. My friend Justin, who gave me this book in the 90s, is shaking his head saying, yeah, sure you will. No, I really am going to be reading The Anubis Gates this year, for sure. At some point, for sure, I will be reading this book. This is a must for this year. Now, the next one that I am for sure going to be reading is The Book of the New Sun. This is Gene Wolfe's Book of the New Sun. First part, second part. This is actually 4 books, which will be helpful for my 500 book challenge. The 500 book challenge, where I am reading 500 books that I own before I'll buy any new ones, and it will extend into the distant future, the 500 book challenge, because I read slow. But this will be helpful because technically this is 4 books. It was originally published as 4 books, so that's how I'm going to count it. And I'm kind of embarrassed I haven't read this yet. This is a book I should have read, so I'm definitely going to read it this year. The Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe. The Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe. But before I read that, I have been advised by a couple people that before I read The Book of the New Sun, I need to read this. I need to read Tales of the Dying Earth by Jack Vance. Apparently, Gene Wolfe took some inspiration from this. He didn't take the story or anything, but I guess this somehow gave him some inspiration, apparently, I am told, for the Book of the New Sun. So I need to read Tales of the Dying Earth by Jack Vance, which again, I am embarrassed that I've never read. And this is 4 books, actually. This is 4 novels in this one book. Again, it'll be helpful for my stupid 500 book challenge. So yeah, Tales of the Dying Earth by Jack Vance. For sure, I'm going to be reading that. I have 2 other books that for sure I'm going to be reading. They're both books by booktubers that have been hanging out forever, and I've really been intending to read them. One is Monster Hunters by David Wiley. I've had this book forever. Pretty much since I've been on BookTube, I think, I've had a copy of Monster Hunters. This is an extra cool copy, though, because it's a signed copy from the author, the great David Wiley. So yeah, going to be finally reading Monster Huntress. And I'm going to be reading Troy Tradup's book, Protect Me from the Things I Think I Want, which has a bunch of plays and short stories and stuff in it. And definitely going to be reading Troy's book. Troy. He's on BookTube, Troy Tradup, he is. He is the author of the greatest werewolf novel of the 21st century, which is The Forsaken Boy. And he wrote this, which I have not read yet, but I'm definitely going to read it this year. So there's that. Also, there are continuing projects. Continuing projects, including my Read Every Book By project, which has been going on for years, and I've been very slow. There were 6 months when I didn't read any books in this project at all, but I'm going to try to pick up the pace this year. We'll see. That is my Read Every Book by Stephen King. I'm reading every book by Stephen King in publication order, and the next book up is The Eyes of the Dragon, which is, it looks like it's some kind of YA fantasy, which, you know, is not really my thing, but how I have to read it. It's Stephen King. It's Eyes of the Dragon. I've heard this is pretty good. I heard it's not great, but I heard it's okay. So, The Eyes of the Dragon, I'm going to read this book. Stephen King. And then I will just continue from there in publication order. I think Thinner is the next one. I think. I'll have to look it up. But yeah, definitely. And as far as reading every book by, I'm going to be continuing to be reading Edgar Rice Burroughs, the great creator of Tarzan and John Carter of Mars and so many other great characters. Also reading Edgar Rice Burroughs books in more or less the order that he wrote them. There's some, because of how these books were published, it can be a little tricky. But more or less, I'm reading them in the order that they were published. Or written, I should say. And the next one on the list is The Writer by Edgar Rice Burroughs, which I must have read at some point in my life and remember nothing about. So, The Writer by Edgar Rice Burroughs. Going to be reading that, and after that, it's another Tarzan book, Jungle Tales of Tarzan. That's a great Frank Frazetta cover there. So, more Edgar Rice Burroughs coming up this year. I'm also going to be concentrating more on pulp fiction, my Pulp Hero project. I've got some pulp I'm going to be reading, including more of The Shadow. This is the next book in the Pyramid series of The Shadow. I've got all the Pyramid Shadow books. Going to read them all. This is the next one. This is Mobsman, The Mobsman on the Spot. This is one of the few books in this series which does not have a Steranko cover. This is just a cover from one of the old The Shadow pulp magazines, I believe. And this is the next one I'll be reading, which is the third book in the Pyramid series, Mobsman on the Spot. And then I'm going to be starting to read this series too. I got a bunch of these Spider paperbacks from Steve Donahue, so I'm just going to read those before I read any of the other Spider books that I've got. This is, it's just, the title is The Spider #1. This has a couple reprints from the old Spider pulp. This has the City of Crime, excuse me. The Secret City of Crime. It's just not your regular City of Crime, it's a secret. And The Spider and the Pain Master. The Spider and the Pain Master. That sounds dark. We'll find out. The Spider. Going to be reading that. Okay. Then, this year, of course, we'll be reading every month except January. We'll be reading books from Roger's Cheap Old Book Club. You are invited to join us for Roger's Cheap Old Book Club. Every book is available in the public domain, so you can get them all for free. You can't get cheaper than that. You can't get cheaper than free. Free is about as cheap as you can get. And we'll be starting the book club in February. We're going to be starting with this book, Of One Blood, or The Hidden Self by Pauline Hopkins, which is a classic horror novel. This edition is from the Horror Writers Association, and it's their line, The Haunted Library of Horror Classics. So, but you don't have to get this book. You can just download it for free from Project Gutenberg. You could just do that and not pay any money. So, I've got that. Now, on to the the reading events and all the other stuff that's going on this year. So, in January, Grammaticus talked me into doing this. This is all Grammaticus' fault. Let's blame Grammaticus. So, Grammaticus talked me into reading this book. This is 10 books, actually. This is the Great Book of Amber, which contains all 10 books in the Chronicles of Amber. This is the complete Amber Chronicles, books 1 through 10. It's big. It's 10 books. So the wonderful channel Grammaticus did a video on the Chronicles of Amber, and he talked me into reading the Chronicles of Amber. So I'm going to be reading this in January. It is going to be Ambuary here at Stately Vaughan Manor. This is probably going to take all of January, and it might go into February because I'm not the quickest reader in the world. But definitely going to be reading the Chronicles of Amber in January. That's going to be awesome. There's another project going on, which was created by Book Songs and Other Magic, called The Winter of Wyndham, where every month in winter, we are reading a John Wyndham book. It doesn't matter which one. Because I will be very booked up in January, I probably won't get to my January book until February. So I'll read 2 books from John Wyndham in February. I've got nothing else going on in February. I shouldn't be doing any reading events, I don't believe, in February, unless I'm forgetting one, which is very possible. But this book is The Infinite Moment by John Wyndham, which is my January Wyndham book that I'll be reading in February. So yeah, going to be reading that. Lots of other events going on this year. One event that probably will be returning, and I've kind of taken part in it the past few years, but I always stumble at this event. I never read as much as I should. And that is Book Trek, created by Vincent Revenant Reads. Book Trek is an event where we read Star Trek books. And I've got a ton of Star Trek books. I've got so many. So I'm going to be making an effort this year to be reading Star Trek books. And so I will take part in Book Trek, of course. And I still have to continue the James Blish. I read the first 2 books this year 2023. And then in 2024, I'll continue, and I've got Star Trek 3 to read from James Blish. These are really thin, good for the 500 book challenge. I'm going to make an effort to read some shorter books this year just to make some progress. I haven't made much progress. I think I'm on book 84 right now of 500. So yeah, I got to make some progress there. And this should help. Star Trek. And I have other Star Trek books lying around. Just random. I have hundreds of random Star Trek books, to be honest. I've got a lot. So yeah, Star Trek, Book Trek. So February, I'll be reading some of that stuff. March, I don't think I've got anything. April, I don't think I've got anything. So those 3 months should be free, where I could just pretty much read whatever I want. I don't think I've got any events happening in those months, and I'm going to try not to take part in the events unless they're really awesome ones, because I've got to have some months free of events so that I could just read whatever. Because in May, a really cool event is going to be happening, which is Horror Mayhem, which was created by the Bookish Bryants, which is all about reading horror fiction. And they focus on short horror fiction, or this event focuses on short horror fiction. I've got a lot of that. I've got, a bunch of anthologies. This is a short little anthology. This is The Devil's Generation, which is just some old paperback horror anthology with lots of cool writers like Ray Bradbury and Richard Matheson and Robert Bloch. Algernon Blackwood is in here. And science fiction writers like Clifford D. Samack and Robert Silverberg. So this looks like a good one. I would probably read this in May for Horror Mayhem because it's short horror fiction. And we've got collections I want to get to, like this one. This is Night Ride and Other Journeys by Hugh Beaumont. I always confuse Charles Beaumont with the Beaver and Wally's dad. It's not Hugh Beaumont. It's It's Charles Beaumont. I watched too much television when I was a little kid. It's Charles Beaumont. And I did see Charles Beaumont on television because he wrote scripts for The Twilight Zone, one of my favorite shows of all time. And he wrote this awesome book. This is Night Ride and Other Journeys, short fiction from Charles Beaumont. And I'm hoping this year to revisit a couple books, and Horror Mayhem might be a good time because they're both shorter or collections of shorter work, including The King in Yellow and Other Stories, the legendary book by Robert W. Chambers. This has the horror stories that were in the book The King in Yellow, but it also has a bunch of Chambers' other horror stories. This is a Dover edition with a terrible cover that looks like people are peeing on a pile of books. So this is not my favorite cover, but this is the cover that I have. What do you do? So there's that. And I also want to revisit this particular book. This is one of my favorite books, but I haven't read it in years. And that's T.E.D. Klein's Dark Gods. There are a couple T.E.D. Klein books that I want to read, or reread actually. This one and The Ceremonies. I'm not sure if I'll get to The Ceremonies this year or not, but definitely want to get to Dark Gods. And I think Horror Mayhem would be a good time. I think it would be a good time to do that. So that's May. And then June. June has one of the greatest reading events of all time. It's June on the Range! June on the Range will return in June. A Western event created by me celebrating Western fiction. And every June on the Range, I'll read a book. I'll read a book by Louis L'Amour. I'll read a book by Zane Grey. I'll read some other books not written by Louis L'Amour and Zane Grey. The Zane Grey book I'll be reading this year is probably going to be this one. This is The Lost Wagon Train. This is just a beat-up old hardcover copy of The Lost Wagon Train. So yeah, it's The Wagon Train and it's lost. So I'll be reading that. The Louis L'Amour book I'm going to be reading this year is probably going to be this one. This is Kilo by Louis L'Amour. So I'll be reading that, probably. And then I'll be reading some other random Westerns. This is just a random Western. This is Luke Short's Bounty Guns. It's Luke Short's Bounty Guns with a bunch of stickers from bookstores on it. Most old Western paperbacks seem to have those stickers on them, I've noticed. So, yeah. Luke Short's Bounty Guns. This is just, I don't know if I'll be reading this in June on the Range, but I might. It's a random Western. So that's June. July, I did a reading event this year for July, but I think I'm going to be keeping July free in 24. I'm going to try to do nothing in July just to catch up on some other stuff, like some of those must-read books I was talking about. And then in August, the greatest reading event of all time created by CriminOlly, Garb-August returns. I have a bunch of trashy books. I've got so many trashy books. You know, I have a couple series that I started like a couple years ago and haven't continued, like The Survivalist. This is about as trashy as you can get. It's The Survivalist by Jerry Ahern. Jerry Ahern's The Survivalist. I read the first book. This is the second book. I have to read that. I probably will continue The Survivalist. And then there's Edge. This would also work for June on the Range, actually, because Edge is a Western series. It's just a trashy one. This is Edge. I have a whole box full of Edge books, which I bought after the first Garb-August. So yeah, Garb-August and Edge, they go together. This is the second book. I read the first book, but I've never continued. I need to because I got a ton of these. So Edge, number 2, 10 Grand by George J. Gilman. George J. Gilman. He wrote that series. And then there's a bunch of other trashy books like this magnificent novelization of one of the greatest motion pictures of all time, Bride. It was a cinematic masterpiece. It won a bunch of Oscars. Sure it did. I'm sure I'm remembering that right. It won a bunch of Oscars. Don't listen to Roger over there. He says I'm full of it. But yeah, I mean, I think Sting won for Best Actor. I mean, of course he would. Why wouldn't he? And, you know, certainly The Bride got Best Picture for whatever year this came out, 1980 something or other. And this is excellent because this is actually a signed copy of it's signed by Vonda and McIntyre. It's signed. It's probably worth $1 million. It's I should treat this delicately because of its vast value. I mean, I'm sure it is. So there's that. That's Garbogust. It's going to be awesome. It always is. Then in September, this is going to be a blasphemous month. September is this year. So Samaran September was a rousing success. I mean, at least here it was at the Manor. Samaran September, where you read the original Conan stories by Robert E. Howard. We read those in September, and it was awesome. So Samaran September is coming around again next September. And you are, of course, perfectly welcome to read the original Robert E. Howard stories in Samaran September. But that is not what we are focusing on, because we already read those stories. This year, the purists, that would be me, the Robert E. Howard purist, will be reading pastiche. So we'll be concentrating this year on Conan pastiche fiction, which is fiction about Conan that was not written by Robert E. Howard, which means a lot of it is going to be crap. But I will be reading something I've kind of intended to get back to, which is the series by L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter. L. Sprague de Camp edited the popular Conan series that came out in the 1960s and the 1970s. They have these awesome Frazetta covers. They presented Robert E. Howard's original stories, but inexplicably mixed up a bunch of pastiche nonsense written by L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter and some other guy whose name I'm forgetting. And they mixed it all up. And it really annoyed all of us Conan purists. But I was reminded that it had, I'm always talking crap about this series, but it's been, years since I've read it. So I'm going to actually read the 12 books. It was 12 books, right? It was 11 or 12. I'm going to read the original 11 or 12 books in this series and just give my thoughts on it. So I will be reading these in Samaran September this year. So the pastiche Conan. And of course, if you want to take part, you don't have to read this. You can read any Conan book. Literally any book about Conan written by anybody, including graphic novels and comic books or whatever. Anybody can write Conan. He's in the public domain. So you could read any Conan book. I mean, it won't be as good as Robert E. Howard's Conan, but, what do you do? So there's that in September. Now, October, I have been commanded by an immortal vampire to return to Varney the Vampire. So in October, I am returning to Varney. Now, I read half of Varney. I read one volume of Varney. But I never read the whole thing, which I always intended to do. So this October, I'm reading all of Varney from beginning to end. And it's very long. I'll be reading it this year in the Dover editions, these old Dover editions, with the teensy tiny print and the really cool pictures. Teensy tiny print and really cool pictures. I just love this edition. I just think it's so cool. There is a newer printing of this, actually. This is the old-timey printing, but I think Dover has a newer edition of this that is still available, I think. Anyway, this is the one I'm going to be reading. It's going to be awesome. And then November and December for 24, I've got free. I don't know that I've got anything lined up for November, December. And they will I'm hoping they remain free so I'm able to... Because, first of all, I don't know that I'll be able to finish Varney in October because it's so long and I'm so slow. But we'll see. But, we'll wait and see. It's hard to predict the future. Anything could happen. But those are my plans for right now. November, December are still clear on my calendar. And that's frankly enough, because I've talked forever today. I will catch you next time.